Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Robert Schmid, Deloitte Digital's Chief IoT Technologist, also known as Mr. IoT. This week on Coffee with Mr. IoT, my co-host is actually Dan Rhodes, and we're going to talk with Davide from Sigfox, and we're going to talk about how Sigfox is going to connect everything, all things to the internet. Davide, welcome. How are you doing? And thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Dan and Robert. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm really looking forward to having a spirited and open conversation about IoT and what we're seeing from Sigfox perspective. So excited to be here.
Davide, let me ask you something. And when we had our prep, we talked about this. Talk about connecting everything to the internet rather than things connect everything. And you talked about Rhinos. But maybe you can, before you get into the Rhinos, tell us what Sigfox do. Just how is that different from Wi-Fi or cellular? Because you guys have an amazing network, and it'd be really worth just to sort of like ground us on what does Sigfox actually do.
Sure. Excellent question. And to sort of start with, I think it's important to sort of lay the groundwork here. You know, Sigfox is an operator in many ways for the Internet of Things. And our vision is to cover, as many markets as we can with, essentially what we call dial tone for the Internet of Things. So the ability to connect as many devices as possible. So that approach and the vision of that approach started with our concept around developing a simple, connectivity protocol, a simple deployment, and a simple set of parameters to connect Internet of Things with as an open market and as an open ecosystem as we can generate. So that when we say network, Sigfox provides a public network, if you will. That is, we're not in the business of selling our base stations, but what we do is we provide that service, and we help companies build the devices. We help them put together the use cases, and then we work with them to bring those devices onto our network.
So what about the Rhinos?
So yeah, before we get into all the details, the Rhinos are an interesting story. So my two favorite use cases are actually the Rhinos and the trees. What we're starting to see is the ability to cover large volumes. We're really in the space where huge millions and millions of devices can be connected, and what's important is to think about how to do that both from a business perspective, certainly, and we're not here to do things for free, but there's also an element about what this technology can bring to the greater good, right? And part of that could be because of our specific niche in the market, which is high volume and low power. So we have the opportunity to keep our devices up and running for 10 years, if you will, and the connectivity between our base station and the devices can exceed dozens of miles, in some cases even 100 miles. We had packets in Europe go 200 miles on some occasions, so between the device and the base station. So low cost, high volume, and what does that lead? It leads into the ability to connect things that previously were unreachable because of certain economic or market conditions, and that's where the Rhinos comes in, right? So we started to think about what if we were able to connect these Rhinos with devices, and we can track them, and we can look at like their feeding habits, and we can look at where they're moving, and how we can improve the life of the Rhino and the longevity of these Rhinos, and with relatively few base stations and some devices and put them up. So we've already launched some Rhinos in Africa today. So a project with the Rhinos in Africa, and that's one of the places that we're starting to see a lot of positive warmth from the investment on the business side carry over to the I would say more of the foundation on the nonprofit side. So that's one of my favorite ones. And we've thought of a few more. You can kind of imagine that there are not just the Rhinos can be covered. A similar one, which is maybe the flora and the fauna kind of parallel is forest fires. And one of the things that you can start to think about is in California, there's 30 some million trees. I believe there's 33 million trees just in the state of California, about one per person. So what we are able to cluster and put devices up around clusters of these trees, and you can start to predict where forest fires might happen or what's happening on some certain fire conditions. And again, it's one of these issues where as you build a public network, you can deploy devices and you can deploy sensing to help the the greater good. So we see those as interesting parallels to what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think one thing that strikes me is if you look back, 15 years ago, everybody was talking about smart dust and mesh networks that you can just sprinkle all these sensors all over the place, right? Well, that never took off, I think, for a variety of reasons, but the long range, characteristics of what's coming out now with Sigfox and others, probably will make that happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, what we're seeing is that there's a large amount of market participants that are expecting high volume to come forth, right? So we're saying that in the software layers, above sort of where Sigfox would operate, there's a lot of companies that help with your smart dust example. There's a lot of companies that are in the space of aggregating and providing value in getting these signals and these packets and organizing them, distributing them, creating applications for them. So there's a big market that's out there already, and there's a lot of players that are delivering that. What still needs to kind of come forth, and I believe this will happen much more in the next couple of years with the entry of some new standards, including NB-IoT with the carriers and some other standards that are going to come forth even with cellular. So you're going to start finally to see the deployment of the networks being able to catch up to what the expectation has been versus all these packets. But it's all happening at different speeds. And what we're starting to see in the market, it's finally this year and in the last year or so, we're finally starting to see some critical mass with the high volumes. We're certainly in projects now where those multi-million opportunity projects are starting to come together. Not dollar opportunities, but device opportunities or endpoint opportunities. People are looking for global high volume plays that have scale.
So Davide, if I hear this right, you guys are sort of like if I get a cell phone, I choose a mobile cell phone provider, and there's a whole bunch of, I'm going to stay away from why I choose whom, right? But the same thing happens with Sigfox. If I want to connect things, Rhinos, trees, or actually industrial things out there in the field that move around, I go with Sigfox or someone like you. Is that correct? Is that a good way to look at it?
Yeah, it's a great way to look at it. I think one of the other important pieces that with that analogy, when you're building a public network, what we've decided to do is roll our public network out with a vision to be global. And global means that you have a device that's communicating in Japan, and that device gets on a ship and lands in California and gets trucked across the country and then is sent over to Holland and then ends up in South Africa in some industrial use case. That whole route is trackable in some ways. And up until now, if you were dealing with some carrier deployment, you would have to have a mechanism to hand all of those pieces off. And with what we're seeing is there's a lot of need to create a single network where companies can quickly put devices in logistics or devices in industrial use cases or in other business formats, and they're trying to move things across the world. And it doesn't matter where you are. It's essentially the radios that essentially very close. The band is very close to, and we're able to track those devices across the world. So that analogy of the cellular space, implies sort of the coverage model, right? And so today, in the U.S., you have some, cellular companies that are providing local coverage, but then you have to travel across the world. We're almost like a Uber cellular, if you will. We're trying to become a global reach with coverage across all countries. I mean, that's the best way to explain what I was trying to say.
I feel like you're taking a good thing at mobile providers where you have to start roaming, and then the roaming gets like 10 times expensive than the regular thing. But it's a great example. If you're just joining us, I'm Robert Schmid, Deloitte Digital's Chief IoT Technologist, and you're watching Coffee with Mr. IoT. Today, Dan and I are talking with Davide Pacchini from Sigworks and Sigfox, and we're having some great conversations. So you talked about something that I thought was interesting, and I wanted to get some specificity because I think it's one of the often misunderstood facts. You talked about range, and you gave ranges of 10 to 20 miles, which is very interesting. So that definitely beats Wi-Fi and for sure beats Bluetooth. And so you can do different things that you can't do with this. But you also talked about cost. Tell me, talk a little bit about cost. Give us some specific examples, if you don't mind, in terms of what does it cost per device to connect, and this has to be different from the SIM cards that I have to stick in when I use.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
What's the cost? Give us some ideas, please.
Well, we've announced a program where we have the ability to deliver our modules, which contain the Sigfox radio and all of the elements for global reach in terms of each one of the 4 regions. And we've pre-announced those prices, and we've listed those prices on websites from different suppliers. So those modules can be accessible under $3 anywhere in the world. And so when you're dealing with a sub $3, in some cases sub $2 modules, it tends to disrupt the market. It tends to provide the market with incentive to develop. And so the devices themselves are going to be relatively inexpensive if you're thinking about high volume. And on the subscription side, absolutely, we're in the by far going to be the most competitive play out on the subscription side, and to try to drive as much volume as we can. And I think in some ways,
Rhino,
our
vision. Does a Rhino cost a month?
So look, I mean, you're talking, this is. A little bit tricky, but essentially you're in this for sure, and we're going to be able to be in the single dollar digits per year per device. So
single dollar digit per year per device.
Yeah, and that's the world we live in, right? And it's going to be cheaper as we move forward, and so what we're starting to see is these large amount of interesting use cases where high volume is required, and where companies have tens of millions of, or maybe in some cases hundreds of millions of items of things that they want to connect, and all of a sudden the opportunity is now there to actually connect them, right? And for example, in the smart city examples, you can start to see a world now with these kind of prices where bulbs all can be connected, doors all can be connected, in every city, in every building, in every city that is out there, right? Or you start to see places where you have in agriculture, you have the opportunity to connect hundreds of square miles of areas where because of the ability to reach and provide value with this kind of device, you can control water quality for for entire states, if you will. So in industrial use cases, you can start to think about having a multiple of 10 or 100 types of sensors when you have this kind of pricing architecture, and so you're getting richer data. You're getting more data points and richer data for sure.
So maybe you could expand on the industrial piece a little bit. What's kind of a cool use case that you've seen?
One of the more interesting use cases is regarding the fact that in the industrial world, in many plays, there is an opportunity for maintenance is important, right? So what's going on is that whether it's a plant or whether it's a machine, or complicated machine, or whether it's sub-elements within the machine, or perhaps it's an assembly line. In all of these cases, part of having an operation requires regular maintenance, and that regular maintenance, for example, refinery, we deal with that in California all the time, where the refinery gets shut down. What we're starting to see is that when you're doing sensing and you're actually doing active sensing, you don't need to actually take things down if you have enough data points across your solution, right? So the predictive maintenance elements of changing the cost curve, changing the longevity curve, changing the economics really that are associated with taking an entire operation down is different when you can deploy a large amount of sensors and devices in that system. And that's one, I think, the most promising elements in the industrial world. We're starting to see much demand for this predictive services, predictive analytics, predictive maintenance kind of activity.
I have to say that predictive is very prevalent. Talk about it. And yet I wonder how we're going to start predicting not just machines, but when we're going to start predicting humans. But what I find, well, there's this whole health thing, right? I'd like to know, someone sent me a notification saying, Robert, stop eating this thing for the third day in a row. It's not good for you. But the thing that's interesting to me is you talked a lot about how it's about the volume of sensors, how you enable people to drop off a lot of sensors and get a lot of data, and that's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Davide, I have a question for you that's totally different in the sense of your personal background. I looked you up on LinkedIn, and you joined Sigfox about a year ago, and you came out of different areas. What did you find from a fresh mind coming in? What was surprising to you to step into the IoT space, to step into Sigfox? What did you look at and say, wow, that's really fascinating, or that's really different, or that's really something that I think wouldn't have happened? Sort of like, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I've had sort of a different approach to the IoT market, although the connecting element has been cloud, and I've been dealing with cloud architecture and for the majority of my career, and I started really, I've even gone through some smaller companies, but I've essentially worked for 3 large companies: Sun Microsystems and Oracle and Nokia and Avaya. And in each one of those places, even in early Sun architecture, the mantra from Scott McNealy, the vision of the planets and the ecosystem was all around thin clients and developing a cloud architecture back then, and certainly at Nokia and for sure at Avaya with building cloud architectures and voice and telephony. So that's what led me into Sigfox, is to try to deliver a cloud vision and to try to help our cloud partners work with us more to bring more services and more value to our customers. And so that's been my perspective, and it's been very interesting working for a company that is so ambitious. I think that's been the more the most refreshing side. When we have a stated goal that we've announced, we're in 31 countries as of now, and we have a very ambitious goal to roll out several countries this year. I believe it's in the 10-digit range, and we're thinking of doubling, and hopefully we'll be doubling that many countries by 2018. That's an ambitious goal to cover the whole world and cover it with this simple architecture and lightweight architecture to try to deliver value. And that's been the most refreshing thing I've seen in this company is the ambitious and the push and the drive to really go big.
So with that kind of history that you've had in this market leading up to things like Sigfox, right? Market drivers aside, all this, business stuff aside, for you personally, like, what do you think would be the coolest application of a Sigfox sensor?
Actually, I want to know, what Sigfox sensors do you have at home?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I have a test device, which we have, it's interesting because we're starting to see more, we're starting to see more B2C, and that's that's what's interesting to me is that you know, right now B2C is really dominated by Wi-Fi, and but people are starting to see, you know, more interesting elements about B2C and what can be done with Sigfox, right? And you know, one of the use cases that I like is in France. You have the ability to basically get your mail delivered, you know, by pushing a button. The post office delivery person turns around and comes back to your house and drops off the mail or picks up the mail for you. So you know, we're starting to see use cases where certainly with some consumer devices and consumer services, you can quickly order and buy things, or you can get access to information. One of the interesting elements is that you know, we're actually supporting in many cases Wi-Fi devices. Our home is surrounded by Wi-Fi, and you know, everybody, I would say, at some level uses Wi-Fi on a daily basis at home, but it tends to, you know, go up and down. And so what we do is we support that Wi-Fi, and if it comes down, we provide the automatic integration of the ID and the password to keep it up and running. And even that value alone, to keep your Wi-Fi streaming positively, I think is a very interesting deployment architecture. But you know, look, I mean, I think B2C is going to happen. I think B2B is already there, and you know, I like the big projects. Certainly, you know, the trees and the Rhinos are the exciting pieces, because you're dealing with big projects, complicated projects that's probably the most fun.
So Davide, we are sort of like coming to the end. I'm writing a blog right now, and what we're debating, and I'd love to get your views before. It's sort of like your closing thing. If you have anything else you want to answer, go for it. But the thought I have is that I feel there is actually more penetration in B2C consumer applications around IoT right now than there's a lot of piloting and trying out in the business going on. But it's not as embraced as in B2C. I mean, how many Nests are out there? How many wearables out there we all use personally? Why is it again that B2C is overtaking B2B?
Why is it? You know, I think that you know, the element of B2C captures people's minds because of the ease of the route to market. In my opinion, it's, you know, you can put up a website and you can put up a technology, and you can have a marketing push and drive B2C, I think, relatively more easily than you can drive B2B. B2B requires, you know, much more robust architecture, the uptime, the delivery of the services, the maintenance of those services, the testing. You know, there still is a large part of the world of Fortune 1000 that is viewing IoT with suspect, because there isn't yet gigantic deployments that are happening. And so in order to go into B2B, I think it's more challenging to you know, to deliver that route to market, and I think that's the fundamental difference. Are
we making it too complicated for B2B?
Yeah, I think that's the issue, right? I think the point that in your blog, I think that you know, we need to sort of think about is the abstraction layer above the middleware layer for the applications to be easy. And you know, so there are providers out there that provide cloud services, and they provide cloud architectures for ingestion and management of the services. But what we really need is those applications that are B2B based to be simple and quickly deployable, so the devices auto-register, the devices communicate quickly, the devices you know, come up in an effective way and provide value. And I don't see that quite yet. I see that there still is a lot of work that needs to be done in order even for the proof of concepts to be deployed. And so as we make that easier, and certainly this is a role where I believe you specifically can provide direct value, make it easier for companies to deploy, I think you'll start to see adoption in B2B much more.
Yeah, thank you for that. We've been internally actually working on a few different concepts like this. We always talk about think big, start small, scale fast. That's our theme, right?
Yeah,
how can we start
exactly.
small? But we've also started to develop a totally integrated solution around where we put together sensors, hardware, and software and services into one, let's call it a box or whatever, right? but it goes all good together, and you can start up in a day rather than in weeks or months. So in any case, with that, it looks like Coffee with Mr. Coffee Break is coming to a close. Dan, any closing thoughts? Anything you want to throw in before we give David the floor for his last thoughts?
No, I think, the only thing I would say just overall, this whole space, Sigfox and LP-WAN technologies is, I mean, it's really going to enable a huge part of the Internet of Things that we haven't seen up until now. So pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I mean, anything closing thoughts?
I agree. Look, I mean, this is not a plug or anything, but I really do feel like, this whole market is exciting. And I think that, the ability to deploy services and build devices that kind of cater to a specific need means that, right now people are being very creative. We've seen so many different iterations of ideas about different sensing elements, different device configurations, and different architectures on the software side that I think we're starting to scratch the surface. And so, yeah, certainly, would love to connect with as many people as we can, and I hope that some of your viewers, Dan, reach out to us. We're going to be, hopefully doing this again with Dan and Robert and across other channels. But we're out there, speaking at conferences. We're out there trying to get our message across and trying to show people how easy it is to connect. So I think that's the best thing that could happen is that the energy level kicks up, and events like this are a fantastic opportunity for us to be able to communicate that value. So thank you for having me on. I really appreciated the time.
David Pacchini, thank you so much for being on with us. It was great having you and great talking about how Sigfox is going to connect everything. Please join Rachel and I next week, Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, for another Coffee with Mr. IoT. And by the way, if you missed any part of today's conversation, you can watch the episode again on my YouTube channel. With that, have a good day. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Wonderful shirt, by the way.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Hang on, we're still